All right, well, welcome back everybody to a beautiful, well, let's just go ahead and call it springtime day here in Florida. The birds are chirping, the trees are starting to bloom out, the grass is turning back green. Awesome day. But later this week, actually in like 2 days, we have some pretty significant weather coming, a lot of rain, and it's supposed to rain for 2 to 3 days straight. So we better get our outside work done now. So what I have here in this trailer, believe it or not, it doesn't look like much, but it's bundled up tight. 692 feet of trim. So I've got a bunch of 7-foot trim. This is to go around all of our doors. And there is several hundred feet of baseboard trim right there that's a little bit larger. All right, so the plan is to get all this off the trailer, get some sawhorses set up, put all these boards on the ground and do just like I did with the tongue and groove pine when I coated it with poly. Because if there's one thing I have learned throughout this process and over my lifetime, I cannot beat it in your head enough. Prep and do everything you can outside, from painting to poly coating, anything that you can before you go in the house. So it makes so much less of a mess. It's the yard. Make all the mess that you want. It is so much easier to paint out here and do touch up inside. If I were to put all this trim around the doors and the walls already painted, put all the baseboard molding down, and now we have fresh floor and everything in there, it would be a nightmare. I'd be on my hands and knees for a couple of days putting down paint, tape and stuff like that to try not to get paint on the floor, on the wall. It's a nightmare. I went ahead and bought pre-prime stuff. I'm planning on painting white, so we're already ahead of the game right here. Let's get it all set up and get it spray painted. All right, so as I'm sitting here unwrapping this crazy long trim, I bought it in 16-foot sections so I'd have less cuts and, more importantly, less seams in the house. But I posted a picture on our YouTube community tab the other day. I know everybody doesn't have access to it. It seems to be mobile users only for some weird reason. And everybody said, oh my goodness, looking at these few packs of trim, they said, wow, you must have taken out a second mortgage or a loan or something on your house to pay for this. Trim is through the roof right now. Anything wood related, it is all absolutely crazy, just absurd prices. So I was considering buying some specialty router bits and making my own trim out of just regular wood, which is through the roof, but it's cheaper than, well, decorative trim is. And then I discovered Lowe's sells something called contractor packs. So this one come 10 pieces, some of them are 12 pieces, some of them are a little less, just depends on the style trim that you're looking. So if you go into a Lowe's and you've got this huge section of trim, go all the way down to the far end. In most stores, it's kind of tucked off to the corner, and you'll see a contractor pack section. Sometimes it's out in the middle of the store, over near their doors and windows. And let me tell you something. I paid almost half price for the same trim that if you walk down the aisle where individual pieces are laid as you do whenever you buy it in a contractor pack. Huge savings, absolutely huge. I was delighted when I see that. Now the problem is you've got a limited selection. They had like 3 or 4 baseboard styles and 3 or 4 door and window trim styles. That's okay. We found a style that we liked and we knew we were going to go with it for the crazy savings. So it's more worth my while to buy contractor packs like this than it was to buy the router bits and spend all the time making the trim for the little bit of savings. So keep that in mind. I know a lot of y'all are looking at building a house. Contractor packs. I'd imagine a Home Depot, maybe some other places have it too, but Lowe's definitely does, and they have them discounted heavily. Also forgot to mention, they offered MDF and this is pine trim boards right here. I absolutely went with pine. MDF loves absorbing water, falls apart. Y'all know my hatred for the stuff. And if you're gonna mop your floors or even Swiffer or anything like that sprays out a wet liquid, stay away from MDF trim. Trust me on that. It'll eventually absorb moisture, it'll flake, and it looks bad years down the road. Absolutely does. All right, so I've got my paint gun all primed up. I'm using a Graco Project Painter Plus. It's the entry-level model that Lowe's has sold for years and years and years. $260, I think is what they're currently going for, maybe $280, somewhere in that range. Has paid for itself time and time again. I'm using a 515 spray tip. That's quite large for what I'm doing here, but I don't believe in going out and buying a bunch of $30 and $40 spray tips every time I have a new project to spray. And as usual, every single time I get set up to paint like this, the wind has just picked up, gusting 10, 15, spray paint's probably gonna go everywhere and all over me. So you can see I've already changed. All right, so let's see if we can get this coated here. Yes, the paint is going absolutely everywhere. Oh, and I am working on a very limited time frame with this monster storm that is heading toward us. So I guess I'm just gonna have to wind up getting covered in this stuff today. Looks like I'm evenly coating 2 pieces at a time. And just like that, you're done. Man, it is so hard to beat an old airless paint sprayer. So now I'm gonna pull everything off, put it on these temporary drying racks that I have set up over here, and just keep repeating the process. I also forgot to mention, I'm just using Sherwin-Williams Super Paint. It's their entry-level one that they have at my local store. But even though it's entry-level, it's very expensive for one. And I find that it's thicker, covers better, lasts longer, more scratch resistant, etc. than all the high-end stuff at Lowe's. But heck, it costs even more than the stuff at Lowe's as well and at the other big box stores. So I'm slowly learning my lesson on paint. Now, it's not saying I won't use some big box store paint, but man, Sherwin-Williams stuff's expensive, but it's one of those you get what you pay for type of scenarios. I have learned that throughout this process as well. All right, 16-foot lumber, boy, not so easy to handle. One down, what feels like 100 more to go. So it is a couple of hours later. I've got all the trim moved up to the house. The paint is nice and dry. So let's go ahead and start with our doors. Now the good thing about this contractor pack of door and window trim that we picked up, it came in 7-foot lengths. 7 foot sounds like a really odd size, because if you go look at the majority of trim, it's going to be 8 foot, 12 foot, 16 foot. That's typically what you see carried at the big box stores. But the good thing about 7 foot is you'll wind up using, let's see, it'll be a total of 5 pieces to trim the inside and outside of a standard height door. So we're just a little under 7 foot to trim out either side, and then you'll cut one of these in half to do your top cap, and you'll wind up with very little waste this way. If I had bought, say, 8-foot trim, I would have wound up with a ton of waste and little end pieces that I'll never use. So I'm happy to see that they offer these in 7 foot. Now, I'm sure to some of y'all, you're like, yeah, that's kind of industry standard. A lot of people don't know that. Everybody's used to the 8, 12, and 16. So I'm just gonna do some simple 45s at the measurement that I just got, and then come back with my top cap and have 45s on the end there, brad nail everything in. We'll come back at the end of all this, caulk all the nail holes and seams, and then I can do some touch-up painting. Done. I should also mention that I am using a 60-tooth trim blade. The more teeth, the better it is about not blowing out or splintering what you're cutting. All right, so here's how I am going to lay my trim out. Some people would put this piece of trim up here and do it all the way flush with the door. I do not like doing that, and there is a specific reason why. So once I get this all nailed up and in place, you're gonna have a gap here, a seam that you're gonna need to come out and caulk. And if you put this trim perfectly flush with the door, when you try to run your caulk gun down it, it'll be all over the place. You wind up with excess caulking out there, you have to smooth it all out. It gets all over the place, it's a lot of extra work. But if you actually work your trim back from the edge, hopefully y'all can see that. So let me show y'all right here. So this is the trim, absolutely flush with the door. If you work it back, say about 1/4 of an inch, I can still nail into the door frame. It looks like it's part of the same design, but here's the cool part. Now I have a V, a groove that I have just made to work my caulk gun tip down into. I can put a nice thin bead in there, and if I do it right, I don't even have to go back and smooth it out with my finger, and it looks so much better. Plus it gives the illusion that the trim is even bigger. And the illusion of trim looking bigger is a good thing for us because we went with this standard 2¼ inch door trim that pretty much comes on every single pre-made door. These just happen to not offer a trim package. We wanted a specific 2-panel design. We had to get what we could get. It's been extremely hard finding these doors. It actually took us a few months to find them all in stock. I bought everything they had. So we looked at going with a 3¼ inch trim, 1 inch wider than this. I kid you not, the price was almost double. It would have been a few $100 more just to trim out a few doors here in the house. Wasn't gonna happen, so we decided to settle on a slightly thinner trim. So if I can step it back 1/4 of an inch, now we've just went from a 2¼ inch trim to what appears to be 2½. Doesn't sound like much, but it does give the eye the illusion that the trim is a little wider because you're seeing more white of the door in this section. So some people may laugh at that, think that it's stupid. I really like making a corner and a V like that, really for running my caulk gun tip. It makes it look so much better and you're not trying to follow a groove that technically isn't there whenever you flush everything up. All right, so I'll admit, I really don't have the proper brad nail guns for this. I am using a 16 gauge nailer. I know I've had some people recommend going all the way up to a 23 gauge pin nailer. I don't have one. I do like a little bit larger brad, especially for going all the way through. This is an 11/16 of an inch trim, 1/2 inch sheetrock, and then getting into the stud. A 16 gauge is perfect for that. I only pop a few every so often, but yeah, I have a relatively large hole that I have to come back and fill. Now, as far as this very thin edge, where I shoot it right into the door, I like to close that gap up some. I have a smaller 18 gauge nailer with 1¼ or 1 inch brads. You could use either one you want and makes a much smaller hole. I'll come back there and shoot a few in as well. So yes, this is requiring some patching. All right, so now I'll come back with my little 18 gauge nailer and every so often put a brad into the actual door frame, tying all this together. All right, that is one side complete minus filling in the gaps and the nail holes. So as I'm down here near the floor filling in a couple nail holes, this reminded me, I had a ton of people ask me a while back, why on earth I was putting my flooring down before installing my interior doors. Well, this is the exact reason why. No jams to cut, nothing to do, just a quick measurement off of my floor, I'm ready to go. Had I installed my interior doors first and put my trim in, now I would have to notch my flooring out, slide it in, and work around all this instead of just dropping it right in. I personally don't see the benefit at all for installing your interior doors first. I would always install them after your flooring. But that's just me. Maybe I'm missing something, but this works out so much easier. All right, so here is our first look at a trimmed out door. So I've got all the nail holes filled in, all the seams and joints. I like it. It looks good. So all that's left to do now is I'll take a 3.5 inch roller with this same white paint that I just sprayed outside, and I'll make one quick run up and around just to make for sure that the nail holes and the little difference in shade and caulking that you can see will get a fresh coat of paint on it, and it'll all blend in perfectly. Then all that's left is our door handles, which are in the mail on the way to us. All right, and here is the beautiful part about those 7-foot pieces of trim. This is why they're so important. I cut 5 pieces of trim to trim that door out, and this is all the scrap that I had. This is absolutely it. Biggest piece right there. 7-foot trim for standard height doors. Man, it works out perfect. Don't waste your money on the 8-foot stuff.